remember the incredible achievement of the largest object ever dropped into fresh water when it hit the Detroit River in 1958. So if you will, I'm going to take you through just kind of a little history of this shipwreck and tell you a little bit more about the Fitzgerald. And because we probably have experts in the audience that know a heck of a lot more than I do, I'm going to defer, and if someone raises their hand and says, Rick, that fact is wrong, I'm going to say you're probably right. I just remember that I am a researcher, I'm a television reporter, I'm an author, I've made probably 13 different videos that have aired on PBS. I've been on the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, and I still know very little compared to the people who actually swung hammers and welders and actually steered the Edmund Fitzgerald. As I look into the audience, I see Dick Oracle, I see Pam, I see so many people that have an incredible wealth of information. I'm humbled by that amount of information, and I hope that we'll be able to bring some of that to the microphone as well. So let's look at this giant freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, 729 feet long, built right here where so many incredible freighters have been built. The William Clay Ford, the pilot house that we still have at Dawson Museum, was built here. The Alpina that I chronicled in my documentary called Cement Boat was launched right here. Sadly, the Cedarville was launched here. It sank in 1965 or 65, in May of 65 at the Mackinac Bridge. But so many of those freighters are still on the waters right now. So this is an incredible place. We had an amazing shipbuilding heritage right here at Great Lakes Engineering Works and all the way through Michigan. Bay City built incredible freighters too. The Daniel J. Morrell that was lost in 1966. And all kinds of warships that were very proudly serving several different navies, including the Coast Guard and the America and the Australian Navy, 3 different ships that were just sunk as underwater fish habitats not too long ago. So these ships that were built in Michigan, we can all be proud of these incredible things. Let's go to the next picture real quick. What's unique about the Fitzgerald, other than her size, was the fact that she was actually built or owned by 1.3 million people. It was owned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. It was the first time that it was an investment for them. They saw this incredible freighter. They thought, we can go ahead and build it, and we'll get somebody like Columbia Transportation to actually do the work on it. So 1.3 million owners, technically, on board the Edmund Fitzgerald. And if you look at the signature, on the right-hand side, the president was Edmund Fitzgerald. So that's where the name came from, this president who came out very frequently here to see the ship being built. I've got footage of that as well. Roscoe, we can go to the next slide. We'll take a look at the size of the Fitzgerald. It's so big that on its deck, you could put the Mayflower, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, and the Ironclad Monitor on its deck. That's how big this freighter was. At the time, it was the biggest on the Great Lakes, and it surpassed several ships. We had a couple that were lengthened to 700 feet, but when she went to 729, it was only because the seaway had been lengthened for ships to go through. And they did some modifications on the MacArthur lock so she could actually fit. And when this ship squeezed through, it literally squeezed through. They built it to the maximum size. Now we've got locks that are a little bit bigger. We have 1,000-foot freighters that are out there now, over a dozen of these 1,000-footers that ply the Great Lakes. We don't see nearly as many freighters as we did back in the days of the Edmund Fitzgerald, but with 1,000-footers, we don't need to because they carry 3 times the cargo, really. When this ship left, let's see if we can, let's hit keel, sure. You see this guy work? He's like multitask. I love it. Here's the keel lane when they put the very first plate of steel down right over here. Hull 301 was the number of the hull. There was only going to be 2 more hulls built after that, 302 and 303, which were the Homer and the Jackson. When they put this piece down, this is the backbone of the ship. All of these pieces would rest on this. And as we talk about what might have happened when that ship went down, there's a lot of suspect when we look at that keel and we talk about it being not structurally sound. But I'll tell you this, there's a lot of workers here that stand behind their work. And in my documentary, we talk to these workers who say they know darn well that there were people going out on this freighter, and that's something that they remembered as they did their work on board here. So when we talk about a faster production weld as this freighter went together, these people stood behind their work, and it was very impressive on what they did. When that piece of steel came together and they built that first platform, then they were presented with a problem of how are you going to get all these other pieces that come in together, and they came up with a really unique design in a way of launching separate hull sections, almost mini launches, if you will. They put together these giant pieces and then they swung those pieces into the water. So we'll see if this thing's going to advance to our next level. Looks like the DVD's having a little bit of problem. Can you go again, please? Here's those giant sections that are being launched into the river system. Yep. Our gremlins are at it already. You want to try another DVD player? Do you have the second one? It looked like it was breaking up a little bit. It made the speed of building the ship so much faster because they could build these subsections, launch them in, sail them down, pick them up with the giant gantry crane, and then build it almost like a modular set. So it was pretty impressive on how they put this together that quickly. And like I said, there would be 2 other freighters that would come out of Great Lakes Engineering Works. The Homer would be later lengthened, but then scrapped. And there's some question as to maybe it had some structural problems. And that's like what I said too, when I bring together people in a crowd like this from Verosco's event, it's interesting to find people in the audience. So if you have an opinion on that, if you've heard anything about the Homer and whether there were structural issues, it'd be interesting to talk to you about it. But literally those sections came together in such a way that they soon had a freighter. And once that thing splashed into the water, first it was big news in the Detroit Free Press and the news. I mean, everybody wanted to come out here. 20,000 people were gathering on these grounds to be able to watch that freighter go into the water. What do you think?
Give us about a minute.
Okay. You could lose the goofy guy on the screen, though. For me, this has been an incredible odyssey. I mean, when we look at starting a story, so many of us think that once you get it done and you put it into a box or it goes on to PBS, that's end. But it's not, because there's so many chapters. Now, when I did the 1913 storm, which next year we'll celebrate 100 years of a storm that started on, quite frankly, Friday of this week and lasted a weekend, we think of the Edmund Fitzgerald, we think of storm winds that kicked up to 60, 70 miles an hour, which is impressive. But the 1913 storm, they came up for 70 miles an hour and stayed for 15 hours straight. It devastated ports, wiped out all the port in Milwaukee. Chicago or Cleveland had so much snow, it just devastated the town. And sadly, freighters all across the Great Lakes were lost. 250 sailors were lost in the 13th storm in one weekend. And to show you how big the Great Lakes are, there's actually 5 of those ships that we haven't found. There's a schooner called the Plymouth. There's 2 500-foot-long freighters. They watched one sail out of Marquette called the H.B. Smith. They know where it's at, but they can't find it. And the Carruthers, the largest Canadian freighter ever on the Great Lakes at the time, was lost as well. We do have one of those ships that actually survived the storm that's in Toledo now that they just repainted, and they've got the Schoonmaker name on it. So if you ever get a chance to go and go to the museum that they're putting together in Toledo, it's now going to be the Maritime Museum of the Great Lakes. They actually have this freighter that survived the 1913 storm. For me, it was impressive because I was able to find a guy that actually was at the wheel when the ship went down. You imagine that, 97 years old. So, and then we think 1913, well, tomorrow will be the anniversary of the 1940 storm, which hit Lake Michigan with such fury, 126 mile an hour winds that slammed into the Lansing Shoals Lighthouse and blew the portholes out of it. And 4 freighters were in the way of that storm. When it first started, it actually started in Washington State. And it blew so hard it destroyed a suspension bridge. Have you ever heard of the Galloping Gertie Bridge? That was destroyed in the 1940 storm. So if you think about those winds coming in, blowing through Chicago, up Lake Michigan, and slamming into the Annecy Minch, a freighter that was just off Pentwater, it ripped it in half. It cleaned the deck houses off. There was no place for the crew to hide. And the ship sank in 40 feet of water. It was tragic. And another ship called the Davik, the captain was from Detroit. And they just rolled over in deep water, 200 feet of water, and went down. The Novadoc was a little better off. Sadly, the 2 cooks were washed overboard, but 17 people were saved by a fish tug that came into town. So we think about these storms, we remember the Fitzgerald, but we also remember that over 30,000 sailors have been lost on the Great Lakes. So it's pretty amazing. 5,000 shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, and we've only found about 800 of them. So there's a lot to be seen. Let's go down to sections. Can you drop down to the part that's, or you can go to the launch. Ah, I already saw that. Can you go to the menu part? Or go all the way over to next, if you can. We'll move on. For November storms, the next big one after the 1940 storm was the Carl D. Bradley. In 1958, November 18th, freighter came up from Gary, Indiana, unloaded its cargo, and started. Here's one of those sections going in now. Unloaded its cargo, came up, and they were supposed to go park in Manitowoc. And the shipping company called up and said, make one more run. So the skipper had a choice. He could go through a big storm that was coming, or he could stay up by Cana Island, and he figured he'd push on. It was a bad call because that ship ripped in half. The cold temperatures were too much for the ship because it was built with pre-World War II steel. 1927 is when it was launched. It ripped in half and sank, and 33 lives were lost. 2 guys bobbed on a life raft overnight and were picked up by the cutter Sundew and rescued. So after that, 1966, the Daniel J. Morrell was built in Bay City, ripped in half, the same kind of steel in a storm. Its sister ship, the Townsend, was cracked in half. And they said, let's get it into port, and they wondered, well, should we sail it again? And the Coast Guard said, no, you can't sail that. Well, they went to scrap it, and on its way through the ocean, it sank. So 2 ships that were lost in this incredible storm. And also the Nordmere, another ship that had run aground in Alpena, had a crew on there that were watching the cargo. This giant storm that sank the Daniel J. Morrell came up. They had a hand-cranked radio, and they were calling for help. And a Coast Guard chopper from Detroit said, I think we can go get them, and flew 200 feet off the water all the way to Alpena, the very tip of the lower peninsula, all the way up there, almost out of gas, saw the people on there and lifted them off in 22 minutes and put them on the cutter Mackinac. It was an incredible rescue in '66. And then you think back on the tip of the thumb, here's Dennis Hale surviving the Daniel J. Morrell. On a life raft, the ship started to break in half, and he literally, all he had was his life jacket. Ran out because it was pitch black on the ship because it had broken. Freezing cold, his toes were squishing in the snow, November 28th. And the guy told him, run back in and get a coat on, you're going to be cold. And sure enough, he got thrown into the water with his coat on in his underwear, and that's it. And he made it. These incredible stories of survival. And I think that's what really made the Fitzgerald so much more puzzling. How is it that we had all these other storms, these incredible freighter crews that at least 1 or 2 survived, and we found so many of the crew sadly lost, but at least those families had that connection to them. You know, they could bury their lost ones. Unfortunately for the Fitzgerald, that just wouldn't happen. Can you go, let's go to next so we can keep on track if you think you can get past it.
Is it past this?
We'll show this real quick. This is the skeg. This is where the propeller went in. They're putting together all of the pieces. This is the stern section now. You can see how big that is. Look at the people down there. That's how big this ship is. When we dove it in the submarine was dwarfed by that giant propeller. And we were almost just astonished as we went around the back section and saw that giant blade to see a rope hanging there with knots in it. And it looked like it was actually the steward's crane. That's how they would load, the cook would load the ship on that little crane that was back where the cook would be. And it really brought a lot of thoughts in our mind as to why that was back there. And then, of course, we thought of the lifeboats. Why was one of them cut in half by that giant propeller? You know, we know that it had some trauma. It somehow ripped in 2. Was it because it swung back on a davit and literally was sliced in half by the prop? We don't know. They still don't know to this day why that life raft was cut in half, or the lifeboat, forgive me. The 2 life rafts, the inflatables, were found, but nobody was on them. Can you go to the next button? Can you get over?
It took 2 cranes to lift 1/2 of the boiler. So we took the 2 and all of they had 6 tons of rigging to pick those things up. And there was 1 piece of steel about maybe 20 feet long, and I was hooked to one end of it, and the other crane was hooked to the other. And it was the middle. The boiler was hooked in the middle of that, and we'd have to raise that straight up till we got it over the ship, and then swing the cranes. The other guy was more of an experienced operator.